Imagine walking into a pristine Walgreens clinic, one of the new wellness centers. You're promised a revolution. Hundreds of blood tests, all from a single, painless drop from your fingertip. It feels like the future. But here's the secret. In the back room, away from the sleek marketing, your tiny drop of blood was often being quietly diluted and run on a bulky machine made by Siemens, a competitor. The storefront sold a miracle. The back room ran a workaround. That gap between the promise and the reality is the entire story of Theranos. The prophet of this revolution was Elizabeth Holmes. In 2003, at just 19, she dropped out of Stanford's chemical engineering program to found Theranos. For a decade, she built in stealth. Then, she exploded into the public consciousness. By 2014, her company was privately valued at $9 billion. Holmes, owning roughly half, became the world's youngest self-made female billionaire, on paper. She cultivated the part, adopting a uniform of black turtlenecks that invited comparisons to Steve Jobs. She even modulated her voice into a surprisingly deep baritone, projecting an aura of unwavering authority. The media couldn't get enough. Here was a visionary, poised to disrupt the entire $75 billion lab testing industry. Investors, from seasoned venture capitalists to family dynasties, lined up to pour more than $700 million into her vision. To seal the deal, Holmes assembled a board of directors that looked less like a corporate oversight committee and more like a Cold War-era cabinet meeting. There was Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, both former secretaries of state. William Perry, a former secretary of defense. James Mattis, a four-star Marine general who would later serve in that same role. These were men of immense prestige and global influence. Their presence on the board served as the ultimate social proof, a signal to the world that Theranos was not just a flight of fancy, but a serious, world-changing enterprise. What the board did not have was deep expertise in clinical diagnostics or laboratory medicine. This wasn't an oversight, it was part of the strategy. Their names opened doors and silenced doubters. Who would dare question the due diligence of men who had managed global superpowers? With that credibility, Holmes didn't just sell a vision, she sold a retail reality. Theranos struck massive partnership deals to put its technology directly in front of consumers. Walgreens agreed to install Theranos wellness centers in its pharmacies, with dozens opening in Arizona and California. This was the beachhead. The bigger prize was Safeway. The grocery giant, under then-CEO Steve Bird, went all in, spending an astonishing $350 million to build out sophisticated clinics in over 800 of its stores. The strategy was audacious. Build the distribution empire first, then perfect the science later. It created a powerful sense of inevitability. With clinics being built and logos going up, the technology simply had to work. The contracts were signed. The pressure was on. Inside Theranos headquarters, the reality was chaos. The revolutionary device, named the Edison, was spectacularly unreliable. Engineers battled constant failures. The machines struggled with accuracy, calibration, and basic consistency. The same sample could produce wildly different results on subsequent runs. Instead of a stable product, it was a constant science experiment. To meet the demands of their live Walgreens partnership, the company resorted to a desperate deception. They secretly bought commercial analyzers from competitors like Siemens. But those machines were designed for standard venous blood draws, not the tiny fingerstick samples Theranos collected. To make it work, technicians had to dilute the pinprick of blood, a practice that can severely distort results for crucial analytes like potassium, potentially leading to disastrous medical advice. The revolution was running on a rival's hardware and a scientifically dubious process. The deception went deeper than just misleading patients. It extended to misleading regulators. Young, idealistic employees like Tyler Schultz, the grandson of board member George Schultz, and Erica Chung began witnessing practices that set off alarm bells. To pass mandatory quality control checks, known as proficiency testing, they saw the company rig the game. Theranos would split test samples. One part would be run on their own faulty Edison machines, which consistently failed. The other part would be run on the reliable, conventional analyzers. They would then submit the good results from the conventional machines to the regulators, creating a perfect illusion of accuracy. It was a calculated fraud designed to hide the Edison's core failure. For employees like Schultz and Chung, this wasn't just a technical problem. It was an ethical nightmare. They were watching a company play roulette with people's health. While the company projected an image of total disruption, its foundation was vanishingly thin. The public promise was a menu of over 200 tests from a single drop of blood. But the regulatory reality was a joke. By the middle of 2015, after years of hype, the Food and Drug Administration had granted formal clearance for exactly one, and only one, Theranos fingerstick test, an assay for the herpes simplex 1 virus antibody. A single niche test. That was it. The entire rest of the sprawling menu was being offered without FDA clearance, operating in a regulatory gray area the company exploited. The financial numbers were just as hollow. Theranos had told its investors it expected to generate around $100 million in revenue in 2014. According to a later SEC investigation, the actual revenue was closer to $100,000. The company wasn't missing its targets by a little. It was off by a factor of 1,000. The secrets couldn't stay in the lab forever. In October 2015, Wall Street Journal reporter John Carreyrou, armed with information from whistleblowers like Tyler Schultz, published his first bombshell exposé. The article laid bare the core deceptions, the use of traditional machines, the unreliable results from the Edison, the proficiency testing cheats. The story was a direct hit on the company's carefully crafted myth. Holmes went on the offensive, appearing on television to deny everything, calling the report false and attacking the sources. She claimed they were simply a high-growth company being targeted by entrenched interests. But the spell was broken. The article gave a voice to every doctor who had received a confusing result, every partner who had endured unexplained delays. The questions were now public, and they were not going away. With the story out in the open, the regulators descended. The FDA sent inspectors who quickly classified the company's signature nanotainer vial as an unapproved medical device, restricting its use. But the truly devastating blow came from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS. Their inspectors conducted a surprise audit of the main Newark, California lab. What they found was so alarming that they issued one of the most severe sanctions possible. They declared that the lab's failures constituted an immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. This is not a phrase regulators use lightly. It is the code red of lab oversight, signaling that ongoing operations posed a direct threat to the public. It was no longer a story about a struggling startup. It was a public health crisis. The regulatory bombshells triggered a corporate exodus. Walgreens, Theranos' most important partner, immediately suspended all testing at its wellness centers. Within months, they terminated the relationship completely and filed a lawsuit seeking $140 million in damages, eventually settling for a reported $25 million. Safeway, which had paused its rollout after the Carreyrou article, quietly and permanently canceled its deal, turning its $350 million investment into one of the most expensive ghost clinics in corporate history. The partnerships that had given Theranos its air of inevitability vanished. The empire, built on a foundation of handshakes and press releases, collapsed as soon as the first real data came to light. The retail revolution was over before it had truly begun. Facing the abyss, Theranos made a stunning admission. In 2016, the company announced it was voiding or correcting tens of thousands of blood test results from its Edison devices, spanning a full 2 years. It was a mass retraction, a tacit confession that its core technology was fundamentally flawed and had been providing bad information to real patients who made medical decisions based on it. The state of Arizona, where the Walgreens partnership was most advanced, forced the company to issue refunds to every single resident who had purchased a test, totaling $4.65 million. Meanwhile, the high-profile investors saw their fortunes evaporate. The DeVos family's $100 million stake was worthless. Rupert Murdoch's $125 million investment was reportedly sold off for a single dollar, a symbolic gesture to claim the tax loss on a total wipeout. The financial collapse was followed by legal reckoning. In March 2018, the SEC charged Holmes and her former partner and COO, Sunny Balwani, with massive fraud. Holmes settled the civil charges, agreeing to pay a $500,000 fine, surrender control of her company, and accept a 10-year ban from serving as an officer or director of a public company. But that was only the beginning. Federal prosecutors pursued a criminal case. After years of delays, Elizabeth Holmes went on trial in 2021. In January 2022, a jury found her guilty on 4 counts of defrauding investors. That November, she was sentenced to 135 months, over 11 years, in federal prison. She reported to begin her sentence in May 2023. Balwani was convicted on all 12 fraud counts in his own trial and received a nearly 13-year sentence. The company itself officially dissolved in 2018, its remaining cash going to creditors. Theranos wasn't just a technical failure. It was a failure of storytelling and a failure of diligence. So why did it work for so long? First, the company weaponized secrecy. By classifying everything as a trade secret, it avoided peer review, the bedrock of scientific validation. Second, it sold the story, not the data. Holmes understood that a compelling narrative about a charismatic visionary changing the world was more powerful to investors than a spreadsheet of validation data. Third, it used social proof as a shield. The board of statesmen and generals made it feel safe, discouraging the kind of technical questions that needed to be asked. And finally, the fraud thrived because clinical testing is a black box to most people. We trust the numbers we are given. Theranos built a beautiful, user-friendly interface for a machine that, in the end, didn't work. The lesson is simple but brutal. Branding cannot calibrate an analyzer, and in medicine, the only story that matters is the one the data tells. At the peak, Holmes sold certainty. In the end, the truth was the revolutionary machine was never hers at all. It was somebody else's. Thanks for watching Boom to Bust. If you find stories about modern business, the spectacular rises and the inevitable falls, as fascinating as we do, consider subscribing. We focus on the moments when a company's peak feels permanent, and then we unpack how it all came apart. There are more stories of founders, fortunes, and frauds waiting for you on the channel. We'll see you in the next one.